Today I'd like to show you a new example of using several new sample libraries for creating a jazz track. You have already heard a part of the track at the beginning of the video. As usual, you can listen it using the link below the video or on my site. Also on my site you can find MIDI and PDF scores. So today we're talking about the sax, Hollowbody, guitar, bass and drum set. As usual, the track was created in Sibelius, then exported into MIDI and imported into Cubase. Here each instrument has a separate track, and each track leads to one instance of this instrument. There are 2 SWAM engines and 3 contact engines. I have been reviewing several sample modeling libraries lately, and on my site you can find links to the videos where I show how to use them. These are the demo tracks, and here you can find the links to the videos. So I'm using alto and tenor sax in this demo track, and as usual they sound very realistic thanks to revolutionary sample modeling algorithms. I will not be talking about every knob and every setting for this instrument because I have already covered them in, for example, video for RoughabGo demo. You can find them on my channel. And in general I use the same techniques that I covered in RoughabGo and One Day on the Red Planet demo tracks. So what is different about the saxophones of sample modeling in comparison to the other instruments of sample modeling is that saxophones are not used in orchestra usually, and the sound of saxophone is usually more articulated, more diverse and more colored with different techniques. This is especially true for the high register or, for example, the alto saxophone, and if you try to sequence the higher register without additional techniques and create some even smooth sound, like for example for flute, this usually will not sound very realistic. If we talk about the lower registers and tenor sax, then there it is not so very important. You sometimes can set the instrument to play plainly, evenly and smoothly. This happens because the human ear is more accustomed to more articulated playing on the saxophone. So let's see the introduction phrase. You can see that I have 2 phrases that are closely sounding, and to make them different and to eliminate the mechanical feeling, I use several techniques here. The first is different dynamics. The dynamics of the first phrase is crescendo, and the second phrase is a little diminuendo. Also, I have different lengths of the first note, and I have different transition between the second and the third note. In the first case, there is legato, and you can see that there is no overlapping, but in this sample modeling SWAM instruments, you do not need overlapping to create legato. You just need the notes to touch each other or to be very close to each other. This is the difference in comparison to most of the contact instruments. And in the second case, I have non-legato playing. So these techniques help me to create a non-repetitive feeling. Then I use bending, overlapping 2 notes, having the second note a low midi velocity, then staccato. Then I use artificial vibrato created with a pitch wheel, and at last there is a little bending down using this note. It sounds like this. You can hear that this bending down for a very short time, having at the same time high dynamics and a little changing in the pitch, which creates a vibrato. Sounds very interesting. Here I have a combination that is unsynchronized with the tenor saxophone. Now there are two more short phrases consisting of two notes, and the first time I played with the band and the second time with staccato. Also having different accents that are created using the MIDI velocity. You see that I use a little vibrato here, created with continuous controls 1st and 19th, and also I add overblowing here. It is almost inaudible here. You can remove it, but it adds a little bit of additional high harmonics. The higher the dynamics, the more it will be changing the sound, the overblowing. Then I switched overblowing on, and for example in some places where the dynamics is high, you can hear this overblowing. The overblowing is best audible at the high attacks when dynamics is high. Here I use non-legato transition and then bending down. By the way, the interval is so long that this creates not just bending but glissando with separate notes. In this phrase I reduce the length of each second note, creating the pairs of note, which is the usual performing technique. Here I add some additional rhyme between the notes, using separate notes here, and then bending. Here's some more bending and alternating between legato and non-legato transitions. At this point the melody is transferred to the other instrument, to the tenor saxophone. You can see if I open them both. The tenor saxophone is shown one octave below, so you can see how the melody is moving from alto to tenor. This is a commonly used orchestral technique. Now let's continue with the alto sax. Here's a short legato phrase. And then there is a chorus part where all the instruments are playing staccatos. At the same time, the same notes, and it sounds like this. You can see that here I use the usual diminuendo, crescendo shape that I often use, and in this case I use it to reveal the tremolo on the guitar. This shape is repeated both in alto and tenor saxophones. The staccatos continue and finish with a short phrase. Here you see some runs, falls, and you see that dynamics started to change more rapidly. For example, in comparison to the previous phrases, where dynamics was changing slowly, here the dynamics is changing more rapidly. This is the some touch of a new style, I think, something like some artistic effect, and this makes music more agile, more flexible. You can see that here I increase dynamics in the middle of the long note, which is usual, and here I increase dynamics towards the highest note and towards the attack of the highest note. Here is an additional note at the end of the phrase. It is not bending, it is just a very short transition, legato transition to a different note. Here is the bending to the note and then sounding the same note. A fall. You can see that I use some vibratos, sometimes a note only for long notes. I use sometimes vibrato for phrases just to create a more moving melody. And here I use vibrato for the long note. Okay, at the end there is some repeating. And in the end there is one note played with all the instruments at the same time. Let's see the tenor saxophone now. Here you can see the same techniques that I was using in the alto saxophone, but these melodies are shifted. You can hear that tenor saxophone in the lower register sounds very good even without adding some articulations if you change the dynamics. So you can see that I use the same legato transitions here. And in general, the saxophone is more legato than the alto saxophone in my piece. This is the starting rung. Here you can see some additional bands and also alternating between the legato and non-legato transitions. Some more phrase with vibrato. Now what is interesting in this phrase is that I reduce the dynamics when I add some run because I do not want it to be accented. Also I use bending to a different direction, not in the direction of the melody moving. So you can see that I bend down and then move up. This is an unusual technique. But with this note, it creates the increase of the pitch range of the intervals and just sounds like saxophone rocking, high to low notes. This is a grace note. And here you can see that when I increase the dynamics of the long note, I also add some growl in this case and frullato in this case. These are controlled with the 21st and 23rd continuous controls. And the purpose of adding these effects is to make the listener feel that the saxophone is trying to play loud. So if you just increase the dynamics, this is usually not enough to create some accent. This can sound just like the saxophone is blowing more air into the instrument, something like that. But if you want to create the feeling that the player is trying to play hard, then you can add this little bit of this noises. Here you can see two same notes. To make this sound realistic, I use different lengths and different MIDI velocities for different accents. Here is some bending. Not bending, but very short grace note, by the way, because the second MIDI velocity is very high. This is bending, because the MIDI velocity is low. Here is bending in the different direction 2 times, first time here, then moving up and then bending up and moving down. So I can say that I like this instrument very much, but of course you need to set it up very carefully, and do not forget that in the higher register you need to add some articulations, some changes in playing, some techniques, so that it sounds more realistic. By the way, I use some random vibrato for this instrument and the default mappings. And also I do not use too much noises, because too much noises can spoil the whole performance. This can sound not realistic, this can sound like some microphone is brought close to the instrument for some reason, or maybe the instrument is not very good, and also this can sound like some machine gun effect, because these noises are repeating, and this is not very realistic, but for some performances you may need to increase the noises. Also, the interesting thing about the noises is that usually you do not need to increase the noises for a long time. For example, sometimes you can create the feeling of the musician playing hard on the instrument, and this can add some theatrical effect, and this can be interesting for a very short time. Just add the noise for one note and then decrease it. You can bind the noise to some continuous control. It is already bound to some continuous controls, and you can just change it during the performance, during the playing of the track. Okay, now let's talk about the guitar. I'm working with this guitar the first time, and also I think I'm working the first time with this company. It creates some percussion, electronic, and guitar and vocal libraries, of some ethnic libraries. I like the demos very much. They have very jazzy sound. It costs 160. Here is how it looks. It has several tabs. By the way, the instrument itself, the library itself has 2 instruments. The first is just some noises. They are mapped to some keys. And the second instrument is the main instrument of the library. It contains all the articulations. This library was created especially for jazz tracks, but it can sound interesting in some other styles. When the instrument is playing, you can see all the articulations that are triggered and where it is played on the fretboard. Here are the articulations that you can use. The first is general sustain articulation. It is triggered when no key switch is pressed. The second is sustain octave. Octave, it's playing the 2 notes at the same time. Then the muted notes, and you can adjust the tightness of the mutes. Tremolo, you can control the dynamics of tremolo using the mod wheel, and also you can control the speed. Of course, all the controls can be bound to some continuous control, and you can change them in your track. Then staccato notes that are triggered with a key switch also. Harmonics triggered with a key switch. You can select different harmonics, natural or artificial. Then hammers and pull-offs that are triggered when you overlap the notes. You do not need any key switch for these. If you overlap the notes and the velocity of the second note is low, then you trigger portamento, like in sample modeling instruments. Also here you can set up the maximum interval of the legato playing of the hammers and pull-offs. Here I use 3 semitones. And also you can create the threshold. It is the time threshold, which ensures that you do not play these legato transitions if you, for example, live playing and playing this, for example, 2 notes, some 2 notes, and if you just do not trigger them at the same time in some simple library, this could create some legato transition. But in this case, if they triggered less in 15 milliseconds between them, then there will be no legato transition, there will be just a chord. Also talking about portamento, you can adjust the dynamics of 2 components of the portamento. The first is the transition, which is just glissando, and the second is the note to which you are creating a glissando. So you can just decrease it to -12%, -12 decibels, but you can not switch it off. This means that if you want to create some, for example, portamento like this, if you do not decrease the length of this note, then you will sound the second note. And this can be held just with decreasing the volume, because it will be heard anyway. So this means that in this library you need to understand that if your portamento is very long, then sometimes you need to decrease the length of the second note, just not to trigger the resulting note. For example, in this case I use portamento, then I stop this and just create my own attack with the same note. This is more convenient because I can control the attack of this note, not inside the articulation using some continuous control, but just using the MIDI velocity. Also, you can control the speed of portamento. The interesting thing about the library is that it has real, recorded, and the smooth modeled vibrato. The first one is just crossfading the normal samples with the vibrato samples. The vibrato is controlled using the first continuous control, the mod wheel. And for example, in this case, I switched to vibrato samples completely, and it sounds like this. And if I switch just, for example, for half, then you will hear some phasing, because 2 samples will be phasing with each other. So you should remember this, and when you use real vibrato, I usually recommend to set mod wheel to the maximum so that you do not trigger the usual samples without vibrato. If you need to change the speed of vibrato, or for example the depth of vibrato during time, then you should use a different type of vibrato. It is triggered with a key switch. After triggering the smooth vibrato, you can use these continuous controls to control the depth and the speed of vibrato. The instruments allows you to transpose, control the velocity curve, control the pitch band range, which is very handy. Although I do not use pitch wheel here, because for me banding with the portamento articulations is enough. But maybe for some different styles of music this can be very handy. Also you can control the strumming speed. Let's talk about the strumming a little bit. So there is a separate strumming mode. In this mode you can just trigger the chord and it will not sound until there is a strumming key. There are two strumming keys which move down and up. So the strumming hand moving down and up. You can control the speed of the strumming using the continuous control. It is bound to this knob. In my case it is 20-second continuous control. And also you can control the velocity of strumming using the MIDI velocity of the strumming key. The length of the strumming key controls the length of the strumming. So it means that when you end the note, you will hear some release. In this case, there will be a left-hand release, which is barely audible, but you can add some right-hand release with an additional key switch, like in this case. You can hear that there are different speed levels of the strumming, and in this case there is fast strumming, here is slow, and here is the slowest one, because the continuous control is at the lowest position in this case. You can see that to synchronize the strumming with the track, I need to stretch the note start to the left, so that the accent takes place somewhere where it synchronizes with the other instruments. Also, you need to understand that synchronizing with a metronome is not a very good idea, because you're not going to play a metronome in the track, so what you need is synchronize with other instruments. This position of the start of the note need to be adjusted manually, and this is a great work. But in this case you will also get a randomization, because you will not, of course, set these note starts so that it is exactly in the position of the metronome, and this leads to randomization that you really need for a track. Okay, now let's talk about selecting the downwards or upwards strumming keys. I usually select the downward strumming keys on the downbeat and the upstroke on the upbeat. But if you have two strokes with a quarter between them, like for example here, then I use the same strumming direction, because this is natural for a guitar player in this track to move his hand down and up each quarter. So for each quarter there will be the same direction, and this is natural. So if you have a quaver between these notes, like for example here, then you usually change the strumming key. On the other hand, sometimes I switch to the opposite direction. Just in this case, the guitar player is playing up on the downbeats and down on the upbeats. This means that the hand is moving slowly in this case, for example. And in this case, he just creates some different sound moving upwards. So for selecting a correct strumming key, you usually need to understand how a guitar player will play. And also you should take into account that if you choose the same strumming key, then it can sound a little bit mechanic. Now let's talk about switching to the normal mode from the strumming mode. In this case, I need to play some melody here. To switch to this melody, I can go two ways. The first one is just switch before the melody. The second one is switch before the last chord. This is what I'm doing. So the last chord is played just in the normal mode without the strumming key. Okay, now let's talk about the melodies. You can see that I select real vibrato with the key switch. Then I select staccato with this key switch. And you can see that You can press the keys on the virtual keyboard, and you can see the information about what is triggered. This is very handy. This is G0, which triggers staccato. Also, I have latching switched off so that when I switch when this key switch finishes, then the engine returns to the sustain. If the latch is switched on, then it will switch only when you trigger some, for example, key switch for the sustain. Okay, so what is important here about the staccatos is that they are not length sensitive. This means that the end of the sample, the end of the note, triggers the release. And if you want to sound a real natural staccato with a natural release, then you should increase the length of this note, which is triggering staccato. And for example, usually it sounds like this. And it sounds very good. And if you decrease the length, then it can sound unnatural. But on the other hand, in some cases, you can create some very interesting sounds with these short staccatos. Maybe it is not so very natural, but it can be interesting in some places in the mix. It will sound okay. Okay, then I use sustains. Here is a pull-off, here is vibrato, and then I use portamento. Okay, now let's see the second melody. Here is it. You can see that I alternate between the pull-offs in this case. Here are two pull-offs, and the striking of a note, picking a note. So this creates the pairs of notes, like in the sample modeling example that I was showing. And this is very natural for real performance. This is natural to pair a note. Or for sometimes it is natural to have 3 notes played with a pull-off, but it is not easy to play, and it is not so very convenient. Then there are also 2 pairs of notes with hammer-ons, and you can see that I create an accent just removing this legato transition. So if there was a legato transition, then there will be just moving of the melody with these pairs further and further like this. But to create an accent, I just remove this legato transition, I remove this overlapping, and I create this staccato filling here. So this is the accent, and this accent is on the downbeat. Here is the harmonic, triggered with a key switch. Here are 2 pull-offs in a row. Here you can see that I trigger some noise. It is on the second channel. It's just the separate instrument, this one. Some noise is triggered from there. And you can see that this noise is not length sensitive, so that you can decrease the noise if you need, but you should be aware that usually if you need natural release, you should create it longer than the sound of the note, okay? Here are some staccatos. The tremolo that is controlled with mod wheel. I think we can almost increase it. This is too much. much. Here is one more melody. A mute. One more mute. Staccato. Okay, you can see that if you just try to emulate a real guitar player, then this library can do for you a very good sound. As for the resources, you can see that the library uses a lot of memory. It's just more than a gigabyte of memory, 1.3 gigabytes. But you can switch off some articulations and decrease the usage of memory. It can be done on the fly. By the way, you can even bind to some continuous control these things, and you can just load and unload some articulations. Also, you can select a string with a continuous control also, play in mono, reset round robin, add some effects, and also you can set up all the effects. By the way, you can access the settings for each articulation, not just on this page, but you can press each of the articulations and set it on the right pane. You can select the pickup, the neck, or the bridge. And here is an interesting setting that allows you to send the pickups to different channels. For example, one pickup to the left and one pickup to the right. And then, for example, you can mix them or do something that you want. Also, you can blend between different pickups. You can control the tone. Okay, the funny thing here is the hand size. You can control the hand size of the player so that it just selects the notes, selects the chords that he can play. And also you can select which frets you want. It means that where the player should try to play. For example, some players usually try to avoid open strings. This is usual for jazz playing, so this setting is okay. And also you can control the release noises and extra peak noise. That, by the way, adds some time and some delay before the attack. Also you can add some random resonance of the strings, and it sounds like this. Okay, that is all about the library. I think it is a very versatile library, and what I liked about this is that it works very good with the default settings. And if you need to change something, then you gradually bind some continuous controls to different settings, and then you can change them not just statically, but you can change them dynamically inside your track. And this is very handy. A lot of bending can be done here, and of course the sound is very good. Now let's talk about the next library. It is the bass library, straight ahead bass. I selected this library for reviewing because I liked the sound of the demo tracks. So the sound is very nice. It has 4 velocity layers for round robins. It has articulations playing with the bow, 3 microphone positions, 2 real microphones and 1 direct sound. And so what is interesting about this library is that the sounds were not recorded just triggering different separate notes, but the library was recorded using some melodies. Here is an example of melody that was used for playing. So the musician played this melody and then the articulations were created cutting this melody and taking different notes from there. The interesting thing about this is that they not just took the long notes, but they also took the short notes, the quavers and the quarters. And what is very unusual about this library is that these quavers and quarters are synchronized with your tempo. And for example, if you trigger a quaver, which is triggered with a key switch like this, sustain, long notes, quarters and quavers, then the quaver will be stretched to your tempo. This means that if you select the tempo that is very far from original tempos, and there are only 3 tempos in this library, then it can sound a little bit not realistic, unnatural, due to just decreased quality of sound. Also, you can hear that if you trigger a short note, then the length of the note does not matter. So it always plays to the end, and it always plays to the real release. This is, in general, this is very good because in many libraries you need to increase the length of the note just to ensure that the real release is played to the end. In this case, the release is always played. You can hear that there is some noise here. So the problem of this library is that maybe in my version of this library, it is one of the first versions, there is some bug, maybe some problem that creates these noises. So this can be a problem, and if you hear these noises, what I can suggest is to change the articulation type. For example, to add key switch here. But you should remember that different lengths of notes in this library differ in dynamics. This is not very natural and understanding, but this is real, and I think this is a result of the fact that the library was created using some melodies, and there are only 4 velocity layers, and maybe there is no crossfading. I don't know, but anyway, when you change the length of the note using the key switch, then dynamics usually changes, and sustain is usually louder than other articulations. So we need to decrease the sound here. So the sustain notes, the length of sustain notes is controlled using the note ends. So in this case you just increase or decrease the length of the note. But of course the decay of the note is very fast, because it is the picked contrabass. You can see that I have some quarter notes at the beginning of the track, and you can see that if I decrease the length of the notes, for example, then there will be no change in sound. There is also some noise again here. So we need to change the articulation again, for example to the sustain note, and then back, and then decrease the dynamics. And I think here we have it again, and again decrease dynamics. And again I have noise here. By the way, if you just play again some short piece, some short portion of melody, then you can not hear the noise, for example. And sometimes you need to play from the beginning, or maybe some measures before this noise that you heard. And sometimes the noise is not audible. So there is no noise. Maybe the noise can be heard when played from this place, but it is not important, because when I will export the track, it will be exported from the beginning. So using this instrument, you do not need to control the length of the notes. And this is both very useful, because you do not need to change the lengths like in most of the instruments where you create the groove using the length. But the downside of this is that the groove that is created by the instrument itself may be not enough in some cases. But you can always switch, for example, to a quaver like this. You can add a key switch, then switch again to a quarter, quaver, and then to a quarter, and this will be a groove, okay? Sounds very nice. But the problem is that now I hear the noises here. So I need to switch again to the quaver. And hear noise again. Here the dynamics is increased because the bass plays the same melody as the other instrument. I think saxophone, let's look. And you can hear the noise again. Well, this can be very frustrating, but in general it can be fixed. So I generally hear some other noises in this place and in this place, but they are barely audible, and in the mix they will not sound. Okay, so usually you need to fight with the noises that you hear. So here the dynamics of these notes is increased just using the MIDI velocity. MIDI velocity here is higher than here. These high MIDI velocities are just the key switches, by the way. In the library you have two different types of instruments. I will show them. They are medium to fast and slow to medium. So if you have slow tempos, medium tempos, you can choose slow, and if you have faster tempos, like above 135, you can choose medium to fast. And also you can use different articulations here, but there will be no legato script that chooses appropriate legato transition sounds from the melodies, and chooses appropriate sounds for each note. So that is why I'm using these articulations, so-called articulations instrument. In general, there are no articulations, no glissanders or some noises, nothing like this. They have only the notes and the mutes, and also echo. This is all that you have in this library, but it sounds very realistic. By the way, I heard the noise here, and I repeated playing from the beginning, and there was no noise. This means that even if you hear some noise, it can be not audible in the exported track. So you usually have to check before changing something, because you can change and then you can find out that what you changed creates a noise. Okay, so what I also did here is alternating between louder and softer sounds, and also the grace notes are usually softer, like for example here and here. Here are the mutes. Okay, so this is a very interesting library. I hope that these problems with noises will be fixed soon in the later versions. And it doesn't have many functions, it doesn't have many different articulations and glissanders and so on, but it has very interesting new approach to the sound when you select the note lengths, and the note is sounded using a natural release without just cutting the note into several parts and then attaching some release to the place where it is needed. And now let's talk about the drums. For drums I use Abbey vintage drummer instrument. It is the contact instrument. It is the most historical instrument of all the Abbey drummers. They have, I think, about 5 or 6 different drummers for 60th, 70th, 80th, 90th, and so on, different styles. This is pretty simple. It has very simple and a little bit limited functions, but this is enough for styles like jazz. You can see, by the way, in the grooves, the styles that this drum set is designed for. Ragtime, jazz, swing, bebop, Latin jazz, soul, funk, indie. But of course you can use it for some other different styles where you need some vintage sound. So for the kit you can change only a snare drum. To hear the kit you can trigger the groove. For example, we can choose the groove that uses the snare. Like for example this one, and then choose different snare. So this one has a more boxy sound. You can control some aspects of the instrument and the mixer right from this page. Like for example the volume envelope. sound design. You can tune it. Control the mix. Of course, you can unload some instruments using this button. Here you can see all these colored keys are the different hits on the drums, and snares and cymbals. You have a mixer where you can do a lot of things. For each instrument you have equalizer, transition master, compressor, tape, saturator, and so on. Also you can control the main microphones, and you have some presets, some general presets, mixer presets for different styles. For example, the ragtime already has just mono signals, which is very convenient for me because I do not need some wide drums. So I selected this preset. And also the instrument has a collection of grooves. The grooves are ordered by the styles, and each styles has several BPMs, and each groove is recorded using a MIDI drum set, so that there are no quantized loops. There are loops that have a real feeling. This is very nice. And for this track I just took about 10 or 20 grooves, different grooves, and combined them in the track. Then I glued them together and I got this track. After gluing different grooves, I had to make the transitions between the grooves smoother, because sometimes the transitions were very dynamically unrealistic, or for example all the instrument changes and you think, oh, how he just moves from these instruments to these instruments and why. Okay, so what I did is added some notes. All the notes that I added are in green. You can see that, for example, in this case I added this ride because the groove was moving from ahead to right. And also I decreased the velocity of many instruments, like for example hi-hats or some cymbals, and sometimes of the bass drum, kick. Here I added several kicks. You can hear that they're very loud, but in the mix, this is what I need. Here I added several brushes because the sound was moving to a very tight groove, and here it was very loose. So the main approach to connecting different grooves is either you increase the contrast between them and maybe even make some pause, or you just try to glue them together to make the transition more smooth. Because if you get something in between, then that can be sound unnatural and strange. Also, you can see that this drum set has control of the hi-hat pedal, and this hi-hat pedal was recorded by a real MIDI drum set, so that you see that it is very randomized already. And by the way, you can add additional randomizations. The first place where you can do that is in the groove. When you select the groove, you can decrease the tightness, and this will randomize. Track, this is extremely randomized. Or you can increase the tightness, and this will quantize the groove. And after quantizing, you can add swing. But this can sound very mechanical. This is the same groove, but it sounds more natural. Also, you can control the velocity, the tempo. And what is interesting, that you can drag these grooves into your project, and also what is important, you can edit these things, edit tightness, swing, velocity, and all this, and then when you drag this, then you get this processed loop. So if you need some processing, you can do it just before the importing the loop into a digital audio workstation. And the second place where you can add some randomization is this. You can switch your randomization, add some randomization of volume, velocity, time, pitch, and tone, and then any track that you just feed into the instrument will be randomized. But it can sound very strange, of course, if you over randomize this. So I did not need randomization because in my case the grooves were already recorded live, and I like the feeling of these grooves. You can, by the way, trigger the kit pieces with mouse click and control the MIDI mappings, control the velocity curves, and so on. Well, talking about this library, I can say that it has a lot of controls, but in general it is very simple. It has very little kit pieces, only one kit, and it doesn't have some improvisation grooves, although I, by the way, took some fills and created something like improvisation in this place where there is no melody, just the rhythm accompaniment and the drum set. It sounds like this. So you can hear that there is some change in rhythm. So the kit is okay, it definitely has some grooves that are already recorded live. It doesn't have some improvisation grooves, but it is very interesting for jazz and the styles like that. Talking about the mastering, in this track I use 2C Ether with the settings, Jazzy Launch, then a little bit of saturation with the Fab Filter Saturn, just a little bit, with a warm tape, and then a limiter that is, as usual, just touching the ground. Talking about position randomization, I can say that in this track we already have randomized drums because they were played live. The rhythm guitar is randomized because the positions of the strumming keys were created manually. The bass is not randomized, it is very straight, and this is okay because we have recorded quarters, quavers and so on, and if we just randomize the beginnings of the note, then the releases will also move, and this can be not very good. But as the guitar and drum set order are randomized, then the bass can be not randomized. It is okay. The saxophones are also not randomized, but there are so much additional articulations and different changes in dynamics, changes in accents, that this randomization is also almost not needed. As for the tempo, in this track I do not use the tempo changes that I usually add randomization tempo changes, but this is just because I use the bass that uses the tempo to stretch the samples, and changing the tempo can decrease the sound quality of these instruments, like for example action strings and sample libraries like this. I add some pauses, fermatas here, and in this case I increase the feeling of fast parts playing fast and slow parts playing slow. Also I decrease tempo at the end. This is all for today. Thank you for listening and subscribe for more videos.